Okay, let's get started. So welcome to the 8th episode of Vision Bootcamp webinar. I'm Peter Zhou. I'm the Chief Scientist of VeChain. And today we also have Dr. Max Run to join me to co-host this webinar. Max is a Senior Research Scientist at VeChain. So as you can see, the title of my presentation today is Blockchain Governance, Bitcoin, Ethereum, EOS, and VeChain. So we're going to talk about blockchain governance. I think blockchain governance is something we don't usually pay much attention to. A lot of time, our focus is on technology behind the blockchain systems. Like many of you, when I started to learn blockchain, my sole focus is on technology. I want to figure out what are the cool technologies behind these different blockchain projects. But when I spend more time, on learning and developing, I started to realize the importance of blockchain governance. So when you talk about growing organically a blockchain-based ecosystem, I think to some extent, blockchain governance is even more important than technology. So today, the purpose of this webinar is not about trying to convince you that VeChains have the best blockchain system there, because different blockchains have different goals, and a blockchain system, a governance system is good for one goal, it may be bad for another. So it's not about comparison. So the purpose of this webinar is to explain to you what is blockchain governance for, to let you to have a better understanding of blockchain governance. I will explain how governance work for some of the major public blockchains, including VeChain. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is blockchain governance. It is a relatively new topic, and I think I've seen more and more blockchain practitioners and academic researchers started to focus on this topic. But unfortunately, we don't have a unanimous consensus on what is blockchain governance. Personally, I agree with the definition given by Thomas Cox in his recent media article, DLT and the Blockchain Governance Design Patterns. So I quote his definition here. So it says, blockchain is by definition the collective management of emergent issues. So there are three keywords for us to understand. So I have already highlighted them. So the first word is collective. So it says that there are maybe multiple parties in this governance system. And these parties, they have their own interests. They may agree or disagree with each other, and they're trying to make decisions that are aligned with their own interests. But all the decisions has to be made through governance. Now, the second keyword is management. It says that there are three major tasks for blockchain governance. So the first task is decision making. It's about making decisions, for example, about what are the changes to the blockchain protocol. The second task is decision enforcing. So once the decision has been made through governance, how can we enforce that decisions? For example, how can we enforce blockchain nodes to upgrade their software to comply with the new blockchain protocol? And the third task is decision making, rule changing. It's about change the governing rules. I don't think many people realize its importance. And when we talk about US governance, we will have to we will see how powerful it is. So the last word is emergent. It says that blockchain governance mainly deal with issues that cannot be properly handled by the current blockchain protocol. So blockchain governance is not about deciding on things like whether this block or transaction is valid or not, because rules for deciding these kind of things have already been written in the code, so it can be decided automatically. So it's about deciding something that cannot be properly dealt with by the current blockchain protocol. For example, there's one case like, remember the famous EOS DAO attack? So when that kind of thing happened, we need blockchain governance to kick in and make decisions. And in case of the DAO attack, the final decision is to hard fork Ethereum protocol to restore the stolen ethers. Okay. So when we look at governance system of different blockchain projects, we need to ask some key questions. So the first question is, who make what decisions? It's about asking who are the participants in the governance system and what can they do in that system. So the next question is, how are decisions made? So is there any explicit rules about how decisions can be made in the system? That question is about that. So the last question is how decisions are enforced. So I think it's very important that once the decisions are made, it can be enforced. Otherwise, the governance will be less useful and attractive to stakeholders. Right, so today we're going to talk about 4 blockchain projects. There are Bitcoin, Ethereum, EOS, and VeChain. So one of the reasons I pick up these blockchains is because they have been all up and running for more than 2 years. I think their governance system has been tested for a relatively longer time. Of course, there are other new, for example, new POS projects, such as the Cosmos, Polkadot, Algorand. All of them have introduced some interesting idea about governance. However, they are relatively new, and it's very difficult for me to directly comment on their ideas because we don't know whether this idea is going to work or not. So I choose to not include them in this webinar. But of course, if you are interested, maybe in future I can make a separate one for these new projects for you guys. So before we start to describe the Bitcoin's governance system, I want to give a quick overview of these projects. So for Bitcoin, we all know that it is the first ever public blockchain there. I think its inventor, Nakamoto Satoshi, didn't pay much attention to governance, which is quite understandable. So the governance of Bitcoin is completely unstructured, and it doesn't explicitly answer any of my key questions. I think later on, Max is going to give you an exciting speech about Bitcoin's governance. So the Ethereum is another great invention in the blockchain world. In terms of governance, I think it is a step forward compared with Bitcoin. So Ethereum offers a clear structure to facilitate its governance activities. However, like Bitcoin, it does not explicitly answer any of my key questions. For EOS and VeChain, the governance design compared with Bitcoin Ethereum is much more sophisticated. It sort of explicit answers all my key questions. And another interesting about these 2 projects is that they try to borrow some ideas from existing governance models. For example, EOS tried to incorporate the off-chain arbitration in its governance system, and VeChain, we borrow some ideas from the traditional corporate governance system. Okay, now let's start with Bitcoin. So Max, it's your turn.
Oh, hi, hello. I'm going to take the floor here to introduce you the governance of Bitcoin since I'm more familiar with this topic. Okay, and please go to next page. So basically, it's a story of a Bitcoin scaling problem. And I will first give you some background about this problem. It's the scaling problem is just trying to solve the problem that Bitcoin has a rather low TPS, which is not more than 7 transactions per second. It's far lower than any mainstream payment system. It's due to the 1 megabytes block size limit, which has been set by Satoshi Nakamoto in the very early days. This problem was already raised around, I think, even before 2012. And when the transaction firstly piled up in the transaction pool and it makes a lot of transactions that cannot be confirmed, then people realize this is a problem. We want to increase the TPS. Many proposals has been proposed since 2012, and two of them stood out uh, in the past few years. And one of them is the on-chain scaling. So you just straightforwardly increase the block size. However, as I also in one of our previous boot camps about blockchain consensus algorithm, I said that you cannot indefinitely increase the block size because it will degrade the security. However, you can indeed increase the block size for a little bit. For example, you increase that, well, not a little bit, you can increase that for 4 times to 4 megabytes without actually degrade the security for too much. So this is one of the proposal to simply increase the block size to, for example, 4 megabytes. And the second proposal is more complicated. It's used some technique called Lightning Network to move some transactions, especially the small amount transactions off the chain. And so it can the transaction can be has lower cost and can be confirmed much faster. The drawback of that is that it only works for small amount transactions, and the senders and receivers need to do some preparations beforehand. Okay, so there are two major groups in the Bitcoin's community who are behind of each of the proposals. One of the major group is the Bitcoin miners. So basically, when I say Bitcoin miners, I mean the owners of the big mining pools. So as you might already know that Bitcoin's mining is quite centralized. So the, like say, 10 biggest Bitcoin mining pool are controlling more than 80% of the Bitcoin's mining power. So basically, they are controlling Bitcoin. So the Bitcoin miners are the mining pool holders who are they support the larger block proposals because with larger blocks, they will have higher mining reward. Well, and then the other important group in here is the Bitcoin's core developer. The core developers are the groups that are in charge of improving and maintaining Bitcoin and on developing the technique of Bitcoin. And most of them, I think most of them are hired by a company called Blockstream. And Lightning Network is also a technique developed by Blockstream. So there are a lot of core developers are also the founders or the developers of Lightning Network. So there is certain interest between interest relation between the core developers and Lightning Network. And so they certainly will support Lightning Network, but for another reason is that most of the core developers are following, well, they follow Satoshi's path. And most of them having a similar mindset as Satoshi Nakamoto. They want to decentralize the power. And they consider that Bitcoin is quite centralized as 80% of the mining power is controlled by the miners. So they want to take some powers from them by moving some transactions off the chain. So that's the background of the Bitcoin scaling problem. So please go to the next page. Yes, and then this discussion has gone on for years without anybody taking any action, well, real action on Bitcoin until 2015. Gary Anderson, who is one of the senior core developer who actually supporting larger block. So he proposed a fork called Bitcoin XT in August 15th, 2015, and this actually have a 4 megabytes block limit. And this is praised by many miners, and this action pushed the Bitcoin to the edge of being split into two. Even Guardian wrote an article about Bitcoins facing a civil war. So this threat of a fork make people force people to sit down together to discuss this issue. So on February 2016, the miners and some developers sat down in Hong Kong, try to find a solution and to avoid Bitcoin being forked. And by that time, the core developers comes up with a very interesting idea called segregated witness. For short, it's SegWit. So this is a very deliberately designed technique. So it has meet the requirements from both sides. First of all, it has a potential of to increase the block size to 4 megabytes. So this is good for the miners. And also it solves a long-standing problem in Bitcoin called the malleability problem. And this will make the implementation of Lightning Network much easier. So it's also good for the Lightning Network. And also it has a good property that it is a soft fork. So the upgrade of implementation of segregated witness will be quite smooth. So it is very unlikely that it will lead to a fork. So with this very interesting idea, the miners and the core developers in Hong Kong, they reached an agreement. So the miners will give up their support on BXT. They will upgrade the many machines to support SegWit. But the core developers are promised so the miners made the core developers to make the promise that after they upgrades they finish implementing SegWit, they will also help in the next version to build to increase the block size. So let's go on to the next page. So now it seems that the SegWit is quite promising direction to go. And then the core developers are start to introducing this to the public, to the community, saying that SegWit is good, it is important, it is necessary step to take. And they launch votes on-chain votes on 2016 October. So this may be the first on-chain governance, for any blockchain. So this on-chain votes allows any block proposers to vote yes or no in their proposed block. And within 2016 blocks, so around 2 weeks time, if more than 95 of the blocks vote yes for SegWit, then SegWit will be activated automatically. So this vote has been embedded in Bitcoin in 2016 October. Well, I think at that time, people, the developer think this will be passed soon. However, for a very long time, the vote not even reach 50%. So, and a lot of the miners who agreed in Hong Kong, they didn't vote yes for SegWit. The reason of that is that both sides think the other side broke their promises. From the miners' perspective, the core developers are agreed to do a upgrade of larger block afterwards. However, all they hear is that they are telling people that SegWit is good and we will do SegWit upgrades, but nobody has mentioned anything about the larger block size upgrade afterwards. So the miners said the promise is, our agreement is that we will only support SegWit if you support us for the larger block size, but you didn't do that. Well, but the core developers claim is that by Hong Kong, you gathered you said you organize a meeting and you only call the core developers who agreed with you to that meeting, but they couldn't represent all of us. So we, as a group, we are not a very highly organized group. We all have our own opinion, and so most of us still don't like the larger block size idea. So both sides feels like being cheated by the other party. So let's go to the next page. So naturally, this SegWit will not be activated since the miners will not support SegWit, feeling cheated, right? And however, the SegWit has a time limit. So when they trigger the vote for SegWit, it will expire in 1 year's time. So by August 2017, by October 2017, if it haven't been activated, then this SegWit will fail. So by feeling this time limitation, some core developers, together with some KOLs, they propose something called UASF, User Activated Soft Fork. So they encourage people and also some of the miners to not accept any block who votes no for SegWit by August 1st. So it means that by August 1st, if everybody do that, then the chain will be full of the blocks who vote yes, right? There will be 100% blocks who vote yes, and SegWit will be activated. But it's basically putting a threat to the miners, saying that if you do not vote yes, we will fork your chain. And also we use our influence to tell the community that this is a user activated soft fork, means that if you really, if by August 1st, you let the fork happen, if you still vote no, then you are against the people's will. You are, we are representing user. So this is the message that the core developers want to send to the miners. So some miners are enraged by it because it is basically a threat of forking Bitcoin. So they just counter it by saying, if you want to fork, then we will give you a fork. They propose UAHF, so a user activated hard fork. They said, we will not accept any block who votes yes for SegWit, and we will do a fork before August 1st. So you'll have nothing to fork. Well, so as the conflict is getting even harsher, but the miners, the majority of the miners feels that eventually if Bitcoin is forked, then the price of Bitcoin will drop, and it's the miner who will lose money. So by May 2017, they sat down in New York, this time without the core developer, only the miners. They agreed to vote yes for SegWit to avoid the fork. And then, of course, the core developers cancel UASF. So it seems that this whole scaling issue, this whole scaling problem end up with a happy ending. But just not, I think a few weeks before August 1st, VRBTC, one of the big mining pool who actually are very against UASF, he's a mining pool that proposed UAHF. They announced a fork of Bitcoin Cash, which using 8 megabytes block size and not SegWit. And they did that on August 1st. And later on, this fork is later on forked by BSV. So let's go to the next page. We can see a figure. Wow. Okay. So we can see a figure showing the adoption of SegWit. And I only want to show you, by now, it's like 60% of the transactions are using SegWit. Well, in my opinion, this is a quite good adoption because SegWit is not really forced to use, it's encouraged. It's just one option. So 60% is quite good already. Well, the next page. However, so does that mean SegWit is successful? I think from a governance perspective, this is a bad example for governance. This is not criticizing Bitcoin because, as Peter said, Bitcoin is the first blockchain. So Satoshi Nakamoto haven't think about any governance problem. Well, he didn't make any solid governance mechanism in Bitcoin. However, this story shows us what would happen if a blockchain don't have a governance mechanism. Because if you don't have a solid mechanism, the first thing is there is no way to make proposal. So Bitcoin scaling lasts for many years. And from 2012 to 2017, only a minor change has been made, which is SegWit. And it's never been, there is no normal way of making the changes. It's always triggered by hard fork threats and eventually end up with some offline emergent meeting. But by that time, the conflict is already too large to be actually to make any negotiation. There is no rule of doing governance. And the first failure in here is that the Hong Kong consensus is not good because not all important people from the community are there to make the agreement. And also this the other lesson we learn is that 95% on-chain voting will never work unless there is a solid consensus off-chain. Otherwise, this bar is too high. Well, and then the outcome, I think, is one of the worst outcomes that could have because it leads to a fork. It leads to a split in the of Bitcoin. From hindsight, some people said, okay, it's only 5% of Bitcoin's value from the current market cap. But I think the 5% Bitcoin's value doesn't really tells the whole story because of the fork, the community splits, the developers split, and these groups are keep on abusing each other. And this maybe, I think, if the fork didn't happen, maybe Bitcoin's value is even higher than current value. So this is a quite bad example for governance. This I think is not a successful governance. This shows what a blockchain without governance would be. So I will give the floor now to Peter to introduce the governance for Ethereum.
Okay, so thanks, Max. So I will keep on describing other governance system for other blockchain projects. So let's talk about Ethereum's governance. So what does Ethereum's governance look like? So back in 2018 in Ethereum's DevCon, Hudson Jameson asked the same question to the audience. So who is this Hudson Jameson? Hudson Jameson is working for Ethereum Foundation, and his title is Ethereum Developer Liaison. He is the key person who is overseeing and facilitating Ethereum's governance activities. So, and then after he asked questions, he put a huge picture, which I show here, a huge picture of Ethereum's founder, Vitalik Buterin, on the screen. And his answer to this question is, it's Vitalik holding a Lambo. I think his answer is most likely joking, but it does indicate the enormous influence and power of Vitalik on Ethereum's governance. I want to quote some comments from an article written by MIT Tech Review about this DevCon. So it wrote, everyone knows that for all Ethereum's ambitions to be decentralized, Buterin is still its North Star. When difficult times have arisen in the past, the community has leaned heavily on him to guide them. Okay, so what is really going on inside Ethereum's governance system? So Mr. Jameson recently wrote an article titled Ethereum Protocol Development Governance and the Network Upgrade Coordination. I think you probably agree with me that Jameson has a pretty good idea about Ethereum's governance system according to his role. So his article is my main source of information when I talk about Ethereum's governance. So according to his article, there are 4 major components inside the system. So I've put these 4 components inside the box here. So the first one is EIP, Ethereum Improvement Proposals. I think Most of you may have already known it. It is a program hosted on GitHub, and where you can submit a proposal to suggest a change to Ethereum's protocol or its client software. Now, the second component is called Fellowship of Ethereum's Magicians. It's actually a forum where EIPs are discussed and debated. The third component is called All Core Devs Meeting. These are bi-weekly online Zoom meetings. They're attended usually by 20 to 30 core developers, Ethereum core developers. And according to Jameson, core developers are those low-level protocol developers, Ethereum client developers, and researchers hired by Ethereum's foundation. So these meetings are very important, and they're recorded online, and they also have agendas and notes also will be recorded and released online. So the fourth component is called Ethereum Cat Herders, and this is a group of people that was initially founded to do note taking for all core devs meeting, and later on they also took the responsibility for communicating with community members, exchanges, and miners about the upcoming protocol changes. So I put 3 arrows here to show you the process of making decisions on EIPs. So if you want to change, make any change to the current Ethereum system, you should submit an EIP. After that, you want to promote and discuss your EIP on the Fellowship of Ethereum Magicians Forum with other developers and community members. Once your EIP gets sufficient amount of support from the community, people like Jameson will put your EIP on the agenda of one of the all core devs meeting, and your EIP will be discussed in this meeting. Right. So I watched a couple of videos about this all core devs meeting, and as Jameson mentioned, these kind of meetings were moderated by people like him to make it purely technical. And to be honest, I didn't quite understand what they are talking about in the meeting. So even like me with a strong technical background, I can't understand completely. And I think these meetings are, unless you are a core developers and you are very interested in the protocol level details, you will probably got lost in the meeting. So the core developers make decisions on EIP in all core devs meeting. If your EIP was accepted, it will be put in the future release of Ethereum software client software. And if your EIP was rejected, it will be either abandoned or returned to the forum for further discussion. Okay, so now let's look at the my key questions about governance. So the first question is, who make what decisions? Right, so I want to quote a sentence from Jameson's article. It says, Ethereum does not have an on-chain governance mechanism like other blockchain protocols. Major decisions about what goes into an upgrade at the client protocol level is at the end of the day decided by the core developers. So the answer is quite obvious. So the core developers is the only group of people inside Ethereum's governance system to make decisions, and their decisions is about they're making decisions about changes to Ethereum's client software or protocol. But there is one problem, that is how to identify core developers. So I quote a post from a Ethereum community member, GH1DRA. So in his post, he says, from my understanding and a brief research, there's no list of Ethereum core devs or even a clear process defined to become one. So he suggested adding a democratic process for selecting core developers, but his suggestion didn't get much attention and support from the Ethereum community. So basically, we don't really know who are those core developers unless you are one of them, right? So the next question is, how are decisions made? We all know that decisions are made inside the all core devs meeting, but how? So I want to turn back to Jameson's article and quote some sentences from his article, which is related to this question. So he wrote, the all core devs meetings are the primary tenet of the governance process of Ethereum. As much as possible, we try to attain rough consensus on decisions that need to be made and avoid voting. And he also wrote, the alternatives to our current system, like on-chain governance mechanisms, are not appealing to me as they generally result in plutocracies being formed. So from his writings, basically, I guess the decisions are made by the so-called rough consensus, and there's no formal way, for example, like voting inside this meeting to make decisions. Once again, if you're not a core developer, you don't really know what exactly the way decisions are made. Now, the last question is, how are decisions enforced? So like Bitcoin, there's no mechanisms designed in Ethereum's governance system to enforce decision. However, unlike Bitcoin, we haven't seen much controversies or chaos during the Ethereum's protocol upgrades. So I want to find out why. So I think one of the main difference between Ethereum and Bitcoin is that for Ethereum, their founder and the spiritual leader, Vitalik Buterin, is still here. It's still there. So it's still active and leading the community. While for Bitcoin, his inventor, Satoshi Nakamoto, disappeared. So it's, if you imagine someone in the Ethereum community suggested to hard fork Ethereum, and because he disagree with Vitalik or the Ethereum Foundation about the future protocol upgrades, I don't think he's going to get any support from the community, and his attempt will doomed, as he's not going to a success. So I think that is one of the main reasons we haven't seen. We have seen this. We have seen the whole process of Ethereum protocol upgrades are relatively smooth. I think another important reason is that there has been already a clear roadmap for future development for Ethereum out there. So what is left for people to do is to come up with some technical solutions to implement that roadmap. I think because on the highest level, people have already have a consensus, so it's more likely for them to accept the new protocol upgrades. Okay. So now let's move on to EOS governance. So, excuse me. The initial design of EOS governance looks very different from the current governance system of EOS. I think so I will talk about the initial design first, and then I tell you why it has undergone a significant change, what has happened. And I think I want to talk about EOS Another reason I want to talk about EOS is because it is a proof of stake blockchain. Its governance includes some fundamental elements for all the POS chain. That is, it includes staking and on-chain voting or referendum. So it provides us some valuable insights about POS blockchain governance. Now, before I get into details of EOS governance, we need to understand some basic information about EOS. So first of all, EOS is practicing the so-called delegate proof of stake consensus. So the basic idea is the token holder, they can vote for delegates to maintain the security of the EOS network. And these delegates are called block producers or BPs in EOS ecosystem. And the top 21 BPs with the most votes from token holders are called super nodes, and they are the only nodes who have the rights to generate new blocks. All right, so, and there is a staking mechanisms in EOS governance, but I will call it semi-staking because there is no explicit profit sharing rules written on the protocol level. So basically, BPs share their profits with token holders who vote for them on a voluntary basis. So token holders can vote directly for the BPs they trust, or they can delegate their voting powers to proxies and vote indirectly. So that's something we see happening for all the POS chains. The last thing I want to talk about is incentive scheme. So every year there will be 1% annual token inflation for the 1% inflation of the total EOS tokens, and these generated new tokens will be distributed to BPs as a reward. So there's another thing I want to mention is that super nodes will be rewarded much more than the rest of the BPs. Okay, so having understand the basics, let's talk about the initial design of EOS governance. So when EOS was launched in early June 2018, there were two very important documents shipped together with the code base. So they are the interim constitution and the BP agreement. So the constitution defined all the governance related rules, and the BP agreement defined the power and obligations for BPs. Now, if you look at the image here, you will have an overview of Ethereum's governance. So in total, there are 3 different parties in the system. We have token holders, we have BPs, and we have ECAF. ECF stands for EOS Core Arbitration Forum. So there are arrows between them that means they can affect each other inside the system. So let's have a look at what they can do in the system. So for token holders, they were given the ultimate power to amend the constitution. Because the constitution consists of all the governing rules, so they theoretically, they can change anything. The token holders are given the power to change anything. But it has to go through a so-called referendum. That means so the token holders will stake their tokens to vote for something. And the constitution says there are a minimum participation rate. It says you need at least 15% of the total EOS token to be staked to make a referendum valid. So you need 50% of total EOS token to participate. Right. Besides that, token holders, they are doing they have the rights to vote for BPs in the DPoS consensus, so they can vote BPs in and out. So the next party is EOS Core Arbitration Forum, or ECAF. It is an organization that is supposed to be consists of professional arbitrators. So as I mentioned, the governance design tried to incorporate the idea of off-chain arbitration in their governance system. So the constitution says all the disputes within the EOS ecosystem, they will be resolved by ECAF, only by ECAF through arbitrations. And ECAF can also issue orders to BP to execute the outcomes of arbitrations. Right. So the last party is, of course, the block producers. They are given extremely they're extremely powerful according to the BP agreement. What they can do, they can freeze any accounts, they can block transactions. So they are very powerful. However, they agree to execute only the valid orders from ECF. That means they cannot make decisions on accounts or transactions by their own. They have to follow the orders from ECAF. So on paper, I think the power of different parties seems to be well designed and pretty much balanced, but did it work in the practice? Well, unfortunately, it didn't work. So let me tell you what has happened. So after the EOS mainnet was launched in June, early June, there was a period for EOS users to swap their ICO tokens from Ethereum to the EOS mainnet. And as you would expect, there were a lot of bad guys trying to do phishing attacks, try to steal people's token. So the initial 21 supernodes handpicked by a company called Block1. By the way, Block1 is a private company that did the ICO for EOS and also developed software for EOS. So these 21 BPs or supernodes was handpicked by Block1, and these BPs, they started an initiative called EOS 911. It is designed to help anyone who can prove that they were the victim of phishing attacks. So on June 17th, these 21 BPs, they unanimously decided to freeze 7 accounts. So their actions actually were very controversial. Controversial because it didn't get, it's not based on order from ECAF. They acted by their own decisions. So it's violated the constitution. But BPs argued that when they did seek help from ECF, and the ECF was not ready at the time, and they have to act quickly without ECF. Well, nevertheless, ECF quickly rectified BP's decision in 48 hours. I put a scanned copy here of the ECAF order to give some idea what it looks like. And as you can see, it is signed by a person called Sam Saposnik. And his title is ECAF Interim Emergency Arbitrator. We will talk about these guys later. So the controversy and the chaos didn't stop there. So only after 5 days, on June 22nd, there's a new ECF order circulated online. It demanded all the BPs to freeze another 27 accounts. So yeah, I also put the scanned copy of the second ECF order here. And it didn't give any reasons why BP should freeze these 27 accounts. Certainly, it caused a lot of angers and confusions within EOS community. And people found out that second order is also signed by Sam Zaposnik, and they're curious who the hell is this guy, and they try to dig out who is Sam. So it turned out that this guy is a professional gardener based in California instead of a professional arbitrator. So it caused a huge outcry in the community, and people were just not happy about ECAF. Well, it turned out at the end that this second order is forged by someone. The whole incident did cause a lot of damage to ECF. People are not willing to trust ECF anymore. So on the June 25th, US New York, one of the 21 supernodes, they announced that they would temporarily refuse to accept any ECF orders. So in their statement, they wrote, because US New York is unable to verify any subsequent opinion of ECF in a transparent and secure manner on chain, we cannot with confidence execute any statement claiming to be an ECAF opinion. We will resume normal processing once communication can be established on chain such that they can be audited by both US New York and the community. So in less than 1 month's time, the whole US community seemed to reach a consensus that its governance is not working. So first of all, we have Dan Larimer, who is the co-founder of US and the CTO of Block One, said he's not happy with the current constitution and he's proposed to abandon it. So on the next day, the Block One, the company behind US, they published a new constitution draft. It emphasized that the EOS user should be responsible for taking care of their tokens and accounts, and disputes should only arise because of some bugs in the code. And on the 23rd of August, US New York proposed a new regulations for arbitrators and forums. So basically, they want multiple forums with their own arbitrators instead of ECAF. So after that, there were a lot of discussions and debates within the community, and they tried to finalize. They tried to find out a new constitution where everybody agreed. So on the February 28th, we have the final version of the new constitution. It's called EOS User Agreement. I think it's mostly drafted by Block One and by all the supernodes who were close to the company. So on the same day, the so-called EUA was put on referendum. As I mentioned before, there were, according to Constitution, you need at least 15% of the token to be staked to make the referendum valid. The actual participation rate is around 2%. So it's much less than 15%. So it seemed that the proposed EUA was going to be dead. However, the supernodes, once again, they acted and bypassed the constitution. They carried out a vote by their own, and there were 15 out of 21 supernodes voted yes for the EUA, and the EUA was pushed through by the supernodes, and it became the de facto new US constitution. So what are the major changes before and after EUA was introduced? So the major changes are, first of all, the ECAF was removed, and there's no more arbitration. So there's actually no more mechanism inside the US governance system for resolving disputes. And secondly, there is no more referendums for decision makings. So token holders no longer given the power to amend the constitution. There's still referendum, but the result of the referendum is not forcible. It's only showing the opinions of the EOS community. So the last change is that all the decisions will be made by supernodes. It requires a majority, which is 15 out of 21 of the supernodes. So everything will be decided by supernodes after EUA. So the final result is, I think it is a huge victory for block producers because they become significantly more powerful. Remember, before EUA, they have to listen to someone. They have to execute orders from the ECAF. But now they no longer need to do that. They can make decisions by their own. So they are the sole decision makers in the governance system. And I think it's a big loss for token holders because there's no referendum for them. So there's no way for them to change something except to vote for VPs. I think one of the reasons for that is the majority of these EOS token holders, they don't really care about EOS governance. I think they could have attended the referendum and veto the EOA if they, so that they can keep their power. So let's quickly get through the key questions. So after EUA, who make what decisions? So BPs make every decision. It includes asset freezing, transaction blocking, protocol upgrading, and incentive schemes. Yes. And the token holders, they can make decisions on, they can vote for BPs as usual. And what are the decisions? What are decisions made? They're made by, how are decisions are made? They're made by supernodes, and there's a threshold there. And how are decisions enforced? So supernodes enforce decisions using system-level smart contracts so that it can apply changes to the EOS network. So there is a mechanism there for decision enforcing. So I think we are running out of time, so I will be quick. So I skip this one. So I want to talk about VeChain now. So I did. So I was interviewed by Thomas Cox recently about VeChain's governance, so Thomas is a former VP of Block One. He's an active member of US community, and he has a strong interest in blockchain governance, and he has done a lot of studies and volunteer to work for some researchers. So the interview was based on a questionnaire produced by researchers from Harvard Business School. So after that, he wrote an article, and if you're interested in our governance, I encourage you to read that article. And I want to quote the summary from the article. It says, VeChain appears to have a robust, detailed design, utilizing a mutually enforcing mix of legal, cultural, market, and code elements to help steer the collective. So I didn't expect, because Thomas was from the US community, I didn't expect such a positive comment from him. So I feel like once I saw the comments, I really feel proud of our governance design. So we all know that our goal is to achieve mass adoption of VeChain's blockchain technology by enterprises. So we want to design a blockchain system that is aligned with our goal. So we want to design a system that can be understood by enterprises, that can be participated by enterprises, and enterprises can play a role inside that system. So what we have done is we borrow some idea from corporate governance, and we make our system structure-wise robust and stable. And we also try to strike a balance between decentralization and efficiency. So the picture shows the overview of our governance system. So basically you have three bodies. We have the board of steering committee, we have long-term token holders, we have authority mass nodes. And I put the dash box here. So the long-term token holders and authority mass nodes can be grouped into a group called stakeholders with voting power. So that means they have the power they can do something in VeChain's governance process. So let's go through what they can do in the system. So for board of steering committee, they are mainly responsible for making decisions on daily operations of VeChain Foundation. And they also make decisions on VeChain Foundation's response to any emergent issues. And decisions are made through voting, and it requires a supermajority for any decisions to be made. And starting from the next board of steering committee, the steering committee will be voted by stakeholders with voting power. So for stakeholders with voting power, they are responsible for making decisions on critical issues, and these issues including the change of network parameters, for example, the gas price range, the VeChainThor generation speed, VeChainThor rewarding ratio. They also make decisions on any changes to consensus change, any change to our consensus algorithms. They also make decisions on who will be on the board of steering committees. And decisions will be made by network-wise voting. And we want to reduce the risks of large token holders or whales manipulating the voting system. So what we do here is we assigned different voting powers to different groups of stakeholders with voting power. For example, the authority mass node, they are given the largest voting power. And for token holders, there are different classes, and the voting power were given to them depending on how long and how much that token is held in the wallet. And also every account can only cast one vote. So yeah, the last thing I want to talk about is emergency handling. So one of the important factors when we evaluate a blockchain governance system is to have a look at its ability to handle emergency. So by emergency, I mean those incidents that could cause significant damage to all of the stakeholders within VeChain's ecosystem. And typically it requires the VeChain Foundation to respond immediately to stop or control the damage. So it's particularly important for blockchain system like VeChain because it has tons of business running on it on a daily basis. So as we can see, once the incident happened, we would expect our technical team to respond very quickly, typically in 24 to 48 hours to come up with a patch. And once they have the patch, they will propose it to the board of steering committee for approval. So the board will have a discussion, a debate, and a vote on the patch. So if the answer is yes, the patch will be released to authority mass nodes. Okay, so as you can see, the whole process until now is quite efficient. But we also want to make sure that the final decision on how to deal with the incident will be made by stakeholders through voting. So after the release of the patch, the foundation will make an announcement explaining what has just happened and how they respond to the incident. It will then organize a vote for stakeholders with voting power to vote on the temporary measure. So stakeholder can vote to agree with the foundation and or they can vote disagree with the foundation. If they disagree with the foundation, if the result is against the foundation's temporary measure, any change to the code will be reversed. So in this way, we are making sure major decisions are made through a process that is sufficiently decentralized. Okay. So yeah, okay. So sorry about the delay. I hope you enjoyed this webinar and have a better understanding of our blockchain governance system. So let's have a look at some of the questions. So hi, VeChain team. The first question is, hi, VeChain team. Wondering if you can explain why VeChain governance model can be enterprise friendly. What are the actual benefits? So as I already said, the design principle for us is to allow enterprise to trust our blockchain and run their business on our blockchain. So structure-wise, we borrowed a lot of ideas from the corporate governance system. So so it's much easier for them to understand what is going on, and they can also participate and play a role in our governance system. As you can see, two of the board of steering committee members, they are from DMVGL. They are the executives from DMVGL. What are the actual benefits is that as we can see that our governance system is very stable, it's robust according to the article of Thomas Cox, who is not a member of VFAM. He is an active member of EOS community, and he has the every motivation to criticize our blockchain system, but his review is quite positive. So for business, they can participate, they can purchase our tokens and apply for a authority master-node. Once they have become an authority master-node, they have a significant say about the decisions to be made in our governance system. And their members can also participate in the election of board of steering committee, and there is a chance for them to be part of the steering committee and even become more powerful. Right. So the second question is, what happens if a client makes some requirement of the governance mechanism, such as changing gas fee? Right. So I think we are going to, I'm not sure who is this client, but we are going to build some facility. For example, some forum, people can discuss their demand and they can post their ideas. I think right now it's only the steering committee member, they can propose change to that gas fee. But yeah, we're listening to the community. If there is a consensus saying that, or there is a real demand, say we need to change the gas fee, one of us is going to propose, then there will be all stakeholder votes, all stakeholder with voting power vote. So everybody is going to vote on that because that's a critical issue that's going to affect everybody. So if the answer is yes, so we can change the gas fee range, I think. Who designed the governance model and illustrated in the white paper? Great work indeed. Thank you very much. So it's a work of a team. It's a teamwork. So I was involved in designing the governance system. Also, as I already tweeted, one of our steering committee member, Dr. Margaret Zhu, she is also heavily involved in designing the governance system, and she has a PhD in the economy. She is expert. He's an expert in governance. He's an expert in corporate governance and risk management. would you share example use case of how VeChain will be leveraged in agricultural? Well, I think this is this question is not really directly related to blockchain governance. I think you can send a request to our BD team, and they will give you many examples in agriculture. So what will be the worst case scenario for VeChain governance-wise? So I think the worst case will be like I think for all of, not only for VeChain, for all of the blockchain which involves voting, a network-wise voting, the worst thing is the token holders, they don't really care about governance. They just don't participate in governance. So no matter how many referendums or voting you're gonna do, there's not enough people to participate. That's the worst case. But we certainly we don't want that to happen. But if you look at our white paper, we have some mechanism to, in case that situation happens, and we have some way to get around it. But we certainly don't want that to happen. We want token holder to be active to participate in our governance. Okay, so that's all of the questions. So do you want to add anything more, Max?
No.
Okay.
I think it's a good answer to questions.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. Hope you have a better understanding of blockchain governance. So bye for now.
Bye.